Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Stephen G. Hart. My guest today is Emil J. Sadloch, President of Sadloch Development Associates. Emil is a consultant and executive coach specializing in the areas of leadership development, training, learning, and human resources. In 2015, he co-authored the Gestalt Coaching Assessment, an assessment that helps internal leaders and external coaches learn and use Gestalt concepts and behaviors in their coaching sessions. He is a member of the Gestalt International Study Center on Cape Cod. Emil is also an instructor for Rutgers University's Executive and Professional Education and School of Public Health. In addition, he's also a professor in Rutgers School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, where he teaches undergraduate courses in leadership studies, including Principles of Leadership, Emotionally Intelligent Leadership, and Transformational Leadership. He's also delivered leadership training for Harvard University's Graduate School of Education and delivered a webinar on change management for Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. And he's currently designing training on change for public health employees. He now facilitates the Tri-State Human Relations Coalition, a Philadelphia area group of individuals at municipal, county, state, and federal levels working to end discrimination and support civil rights. Welcome, Emil. It's great to see you. Thank you for being part of our podcast today.
Steve, I'm happy to have an opportunity to speak with you and to have this discussion to support your podcast efforts.
Thank you. It's been it's a real treat for me to have guests on the show who share my own passion for learning and development. And I was curious a little bit, how did you get into this business?
How did I get into the business? Well, my start was as a high school English teacher a long time ago. And I found that the world of education was a place that I had something to offer in supporting my students and giving them an opportunity to grow in learning literature and writing skills. I moved from there into a transition role where I was a writer of training programs for a consulting firm, and then became a training manager in New York for Thomas Cook Travel, and learned about and started working on leadership and management training programs, sales training, team building, and those kinds of things. And that was the flow that got me post-college into the world of work in the training environment.
Well, that's great. And I see that you're engaged in quite a wide range of organizational development activities now for your clients. You do things, lots of workshops, facilitating conversations. You do some coaching and performance management, all those types of things. What are some of the trends that you see in today's organizations and leadership trends that you think are impacting the work today?
Well, over the recent years, I think more and more organizations are saying we have to provide leadership development for people at all levels in the organization, from frontline individual contributors to supervisors to senior leaders, and of course to executives, where executive ed has always been popular in corporations. So I think that the continued focus on how to build leaders who will make the most of their people, help their people become most effective, and support the organizational results, that's a trend that continues. Over time, many organizations went heavily into diversity and inclusion initiatives. That seemed to lessen over the last few years, but I think now there's a greater interest in diversity, equity, inclusion, as we talk more about issues that are going on in society and how leaders can create more inclusive environments. The whole idea of this is to give individuals the opportunity to contribute, have leaders create environments where people can contribute and want to do their best, and help leaders pull together the most effective organizational roles, organizational initiatives, and get the results that keep good talent on board and help people find the most from their work.
Yeah, I know that's a real great passion of yours, and I wonder what are some of the specifics that you're doing with leaders to bring about some of the things that you just talked about.
Well, one of the recent projects that I've worked on has been a program on influence skills for a pharmaceutical organization, where in their clinical trial groups, they're looking to build skills for management, leadership, but focused around influence, interpersonal skills, how we can work better together in teams and help the clinical trial teams deliver more effectively. So that's an interesting recent project. The idea of teams continues to be part of my work, working with organizations to try to help them facilitate and develop strong team members, strong team leaders, effective high performance teams. Those are some recent things I've done. And I've had an interesting project with Columbia University recently where we're designing change management training programs, systems thinking modules that are going online to help individuals in public health become more effective in those leadership and management roles. Some of those courses have actually been put onto the CDC website, where CDC employees can join in and take the courses and continue their own personal learning. So those are some recent projects that I've been working on.
Yeah, now you're also a teacher, right? And a couple of, I think you've done some work with Rutgers University and also with Harvard. So tell us a little bit about that background.
Yeah, well, with Rutgers, I've got an over 20-year relationship, mostly in outreach courses, where a colleague brought me in to do programs for organizations that are supported by Rutgers, but they're non-credit courses. For instance, many years ago, I facilitated a strategic planning conference for the peach growers of New Jersey. And I've also done visioning conferences for some of the Rutgers internal departments and done analyses for departments on how they could function more effectively as an academic unit. So the Rutgers work has been in education and in executive education, and that non-credit work that's quite interesting, but also teaching undergraduates in the leadership skills curriculum. I teach transformational leadership. I teach the 5 practices from the Kouzes and Posner Leadership Challenge model. I teach emotionally intelligent leadership, and we're attempting to help students learn about leadership, build skills so that as they get into organizations, they can hit the ground running and be most effective there. So working with undergraduates as well as the outreach programs from Rutgers has been really a good thing for me over the last few years, particularly. It's been quite dynamic.
Mm. When you and I had a chat before we did this podcast, you mentioned that you don't see yourself as a thought leader with regard to your work, preferring to see yourself more as a designer or convener of other people's ideas. You mentioned Kouzes and Posner
Yeah.
and the leadership challenge there. So you really are bringing content to life in practical ways that other people have created. How do you go about that? Because that is to me is a very special skill.
Well, I've been affiliated with several organizations that I've been, just really enjoyed my time working with them, starting early on when I was an internal training manager and director of training at Thomas Cook, working with the Zenger Miller organization. And Zenger Miller launched itself into Achieve Global, and the philosophy and the camaraderie and the focus and the passion that Zenger Miller people brought to their work really reflected on me. The 5 principles, the basic principles that we used, meant a lot to me in terms of what I think leaders are and what they should do. And so that means something. So I stayed with them for quite a long time. Similarly, the leadership challenge and the 5 practices of exemplary leaders from Kouzes and Posner has meant a lot. So I like to get involved with organizations that have a certain passion, a deeper ethical and moral belief about leadership, and who stand for something that's significant. And then in the education, people seem to respond to it. So I select and I work with other vendors, but also design my own courses to try to bring out the elements of of moral and ethical leadership that I think are so important.
Yeah, our paths crossed quite a bit with the leadership challenge workshop that you did for an organization I worked for many
Yeah,
years. That's where we
yeah,
first met, and I saw the wonderful impact
yeah.
that the leadership challenge has in there. I just sort of have very fond memories of the helium stick and a few other things in there. So how do you go about making this stuff so interactive? I mean, these are lengthy days of sitting in a classroom, but you really bring this content to life a little bit. Let's talk to me a little bit about you. You may think it's just quite natural, but I see something magical happen when you're in charge of the room.
Well, in terms of instructional design, I believe that when people are engaged or interactive or are doing things and learning on their own, it's much more effective than me standing and talking at them about content. Sure, there's a part of it where I present content and I offer them insights around the core information we're covering in the course. But I like to use card exercises and give people a chance to play with cards and make decisions and talk together in small teams and reach personal insights on their own. And then to summarize and discuss and see how that applies. So the interactive nature of the learning experience is something I try to focus on. I get people to do work in role plays, practices, so that they're actually applying the skills. And then I encourage them to think about how they can take it back to the workplace. So it's a learning model that I gained from my experience with Zenger Miller that continues with my own philosophies today on how to make learning interactive and engaging and hopefully have people take it away and work with it well.
Yeah, so you're talking a little bit about your Gestalt theory, I think, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I got interested in Gestalt several years ago in looking at the concepts of Gestalt coaching. And in moving more from the leadership education field into coaching, I saw that the Gestalt coaching model, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, can be very effective for people in terms of learning about their insights during the coaching session, and as a coach, helping people to gain something about it. So, in the process of Gestalt coaching, we really think of what's called the cycle of experience, and the cycle of experience starts with creating a sensation, getting people to see that there is some potential to work on, some area or topic that's valuable for them. And then as the coach continues to question and explore that topic with the individual, to dig more deeply into the meaning, the insights of that particular issue for the client. In that, there's quite a bit of exploration, there is experimentation, there's consideration of Gestalt concepts such as continuums, where we think of, what do you have that's well developed? What skills are strong for you? What are less developed skills that you might pay more attention to and to work on? So, in bringing out those kinds of concepts during coaching sessions, people gain insights. They see the potential that they can move towards. And I think that the flow of Gestalt concepts and the coaching model really can help people reach insights and make personal improvements and changes that they find rewarding and valuable.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. The idea of this sort of deep personal journey of learning, isn't it?
Yeah, and the experience I've had, I've taken courses at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland and also Philadelphia's group that looks at Gestalt work. But most of my insights have come from the Gestalt International Center in Cape Cod. And when I get there to the Cape and the environment, just the air of the water of the ocean and the peace of the Gestalt Center on Cape Cod, I just find myself being renewed and engaged in personal journeys, personal learning, as well as getting something that I hope I can take back to the people I work with. So that's a place where I find personal growth and learning coming from.
You have to create some kind of environment for your coaching clients that you're working with in their organizations? They don't have the great outdoors. Perhaps they're in an office, in a building. How do you bring that sensory experience to them in that method?
Well, it isn't quite as wonderful usually as the Cape Cod Center, but most of my coaching, Steve, comes as we've worked together on after people have had a 360, and most often it's the Leadership Practices Inventory by Kouzes and Posner. I also use the ESCI, the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, developed by Goldman and published by Hay Group Korn Ferry now. Um, but post those 360s, I meet with my clients in doing the review of the data, the summary that they've gotten, the exploration of the meaning of the data. And while the environment is almost always in an office or a conference room, I try to create a relaxed, open, optimistic, hopeful atmosphere for them to be able to hear the information, explore the meaning of the data they've gotten from the 360, and then make some sense of it so they can create goals and move forward in building personal leadership skills based on either emotional intelligence or leadership concepts. So I try to set a calm, relaxed, kind of patient and easygoing tone in those situations. But I think it's also important to bring in some challenging questions and to search a little bit deeper and encourage the client to go a little deeper in his or her thought in a coaching session.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Because for some people, going right into a 360 degree can feel a little terrifying.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's in my exposure, my start of working with 360s came from the Clark Wilson group. And Clark Wilson believed that people should always have a coach or an individual with them when they get their 360 feedback so that they're working with someone who can help them understand the emotions that can come up. Sometimes people get very harsh comments on 360s, and being there to temper and to help understand and to explore those comments um, is a value that a coach provides. But also helping the individual to take the insights and to move forward with some positive effort to see goals, actions to take, things to work on based on the feedback is a way that the coach plays a helping role to the client who gets that feedback in a 360.
I would imagine those are fairly intense conversations, at least for some people, right? Because I think a lot of us feel perhaps we do better than we think we're doing in an organization as a leader, and we're often confronted with something in a 360 that was a surprise element or something that really stings.
Yeah, the 360 process uh, used appropriately is for development, not for performance management. It's a process where the person should gain some insights about strengths. And I always focus on the strengths. What are you coming away with that is well developed, that are the strengths that you have that you're seeing that people are telling you about, and opening up that one window where you know more about yourself from that feedback, but also what stings for you a little bit, because feedback always does have a personal sting to it. What stings for you, but what resonates enough so that you might work on it, address that as an approach to improve on and to take some steps on. And in the coaching environment, in the coaching session, that's a place where individuals can gain those insights and move forward, hopefully productively, to work to improve their leadership.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the LPI,
Mhm.
Leadership Practice and Inventory, as you've seen. We used it extensively in the work that we did together
Mhm.
some years
Yep.
ago. Can you deconstruct that 360 a bit for me? Tell us some of the elements that are measured in that 360 degree.
Well, Kouzes and Posner developed the model for the LPI over 25 years ago. And as academics, they wanted to identify a model for leadership. And after doing their many interviews based on a key question, what are the characteristics, the behaviors, the attitudes that you might see in a leader whom you would willingly follow. They took their data and they broke it down into the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Model the way is number 1, and model the way is all about leading by example, setting a tone, showing a moral and an ethical approach to leadership that shows others the right way to lead. The second practice is inspire a shared vision. And this is the vision thing that so many leadership models talk about. Where are we going? What is the potential we have? How can we get people to make commitments to a desired future that we can all move toward that shared vision? Challenge the process is the third practice. Challenge is very interesting because it's about opportunity, innovation, improvement, change. What can we do to continue to improve ourselves, because status quo isn't the way to be the most effective organization? How can leaders initiate and create disruptions that will get us to move forward effectively? The final 2 elements of this model are more of the humanistic side. Enable others to act is how can we be good team builders, trust builders, encouragers of our employees, and get them to work well together and work well with them. And then finally, the final is encourage the heart. How can we reinforce support, show appreciation, and value the contributions of individuals? So those 5 practices are the core elements that people get feedback on in the LPI. And there are behaviors within the assessment that people find strengths in and areas to work on. The philosophy of leadership is important. One's ability to show respect and dignity to others is important, as are all of the 30 elements in the LPI. So it's a valuable model that I find effective and I like working with.
Yeah, I love it too, and one of the reasons I love it is it's both mindset and method, isn't it? It's holistic in its thinking. It
Yeah.
looked at the entire realm of the leadership engagement process, and how are you doing from a modeling perspective, and how are you working from a place of respect and dignity to the people that you lead? So it's so beautifully inclusive that way.
Yeah, and the authors, Kuzes and Posner, continue to write, continue to bring out ideas and insights that are valuable and helpful, and help improve the learning of leadership in the world. I like that, and it's part of one of my Rutgers courses that I teach, transformational leadership, and the 5 practices is what it's called. But there are other courses that present other elements of leadership. Adaptive leadership is one aspect that I brought into my change management development. You mentioned Harvard earlier, and I did a couple of interesting sessions working with the Harvard Graduate School of Education a couple of years ago. Last year's course was canceled because of COVID, but they bring together a group of international university leaders, presidents and chief academic officers and others from Southeast Asia. And the program provides these leaders a 3-week period of time where they're studying and going deeply into leadership. The last time I did it in 2019, we used the Bowman and Deal model of the 4 frames of leadership, and created a 360 around that, so that the leaders could examine how they're applying those 4 frames of leadership. Each one had a 360 feedback, and then the Harvard faculty who followed me after the 360 continued to help them gain insights and understanding that's valuable for them in terms of going back to their schools and showing effective leadership. So various models in various situations can be really effective.
Do you find that your assessments and this model of leadership, since you worked with people in other countries, is the language of leadership universal?
I think that there's certainly a universality of it. There's an interesting difference I'll pick up first. It says in terms of working with the groups in the Harvard program, there's a humility and a humbleness and an acceptance of feedback, of difficult feedback and difficult information that I find the leaders from Southeast Asia showed that's a little different than people here. They do not show us, they showed less of a sense of personal pride and aggressiveness and assertiveness that some American leaders can show. They're more humble in accepting the feedback and attempting to work with it. In working with some American leaders, I've found them to be a little bit more resistant, which is a natural process, normal for us to feel and to experience, but a little bit more perhaps resentful about the information they're getting. So there's a universal set of concepts, I think, that we can give people feedback about. I find it curious how individuals, perhaps based on the cultural elements, might be accepting that kind of feedback and information.
Yeah, so you've been doing a lot with nonprofit work as well, outside of the corporate work and education stuff that you've been doing. What's your take on the nonprofit world in terms of leadership needs?
Well, it's interesting. I've got two different initiatives with nonprofits that I'm following through on that I'm proud of and that I enjoy doing. One is I've worked with several nonprofits in providing strategic planning workshops with them to help them focus on what their vision is, what the mission is, how they can build their abilities to move forward productively and be successful. And so I like working with nonprofits and other organizations, religious organizations, in giving them an opportunity to create visions, missions, and move towards a future that's helpful for them. So that's something that I've done quite often over the years and enjoy very much as part of a pro bono and free effort to try to help nonprofits work. Uh, but I also have been very active myself recently in Bucks County and in the Philadelphia area, working on what we call human relations work. I was a member of the Bucks County Human Relations Council for almost 10 years, and our mission statement said we address discrimination and bias within the county, and we try to provide sources of support for individuals who've experienced bias and discrimination, and we try to create opportunities to foster better environments within the county. In Philadelphia, the group is called the Tri-State Human Relations Coalition, and we too collaborate with the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and we help to address issues, help the HRC members, the local and state and county HRC members, better create relations and environments in their community that can be sound and be positive. So I'm quite proud of what I've done in helping those different groups move forward in helping make society and communities better.
Yeah, so you've been involved in all this activity, then suddenly March 2020, along comes the pandemic. How was your world disrupted, and how have you been able to continue, or what have you been able to continue around these things since the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting that in the middle of last year, project work for me fell off the table because most of my project work was workshops, and workshops went away, and just a few of them turned into Zoom workshops. But for a period of time, it was really nothing going on. Finally, in the fall, things started to pick up again, and clients and collaborations appeared. And moving into this year, I've had some interesting projects continuing on in doing Zoom workshops, WebEx workshops, but turning content that is face-to-face content where I excel and where I feel good about myself and about what I provide into this virtual world. And there are positives in the virtual world, but there are also challenges that can be difficult. And I think that we can see both opportunities and difficulties in moving from face-to-face to virtual. And I'm trying to work through those and keep moving forward day by day.
Yeah, it's been a big challenge, hasn't it? Sort of reinventing. And you
Yeah.
talked earlier about experimentation, and I wonder, um, you know, as a, how much of what you teach have you had to sort of live out this year?
Well, you mentioned experimentation, and in one of my exercises, or several of my exercises, I mentioned earlier, I like to use card activities in classes. Um, People put up on Post-it notes or sticky notes, they put up different terms and they have to go to a flip chart and reorganize that. How the heck do you do something like that in the virtual world? Well, there is a possibility for using it. It's something called Jamboard. It's in Google. I didn't know about it. I found out about it through my Rutgers contacts. But you're experimenting and trying to figure out how to make something that works well in a face-to-face environment work well in a virtual environment. And that testing, that risk, that uncertainty uh, builds up prior to the session. And I've got some sessions in April for a Rutgers client that we're going to be using some of those approaches using sticky notes and Jamboard, that I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go, but I'm confident that I'll do enough prep and I'll get enough help and support to make it a good experience. But I do think that there are positives in online learning. Undergraduates that I work with are writing constantly, answering questions, doing papers, and they're putting themselves out a lot more than if they were sitting in a classroom hearing primarily a lecture. So there are balancing elements. I think students in asynchronous learning online, really do produce a lot more thought, ideas, comments that shows them as being learners of the topic we're working on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've seen that myself this last year, and having done a lot of online learning work in previous years at other universities, it's been fascinating. But one of the things that I'm concerned about with the current environment is that as the facilitator of the learning, you feel like a bit of a one man band when you have to push all the bells and whistles and does. Are you working with a producer model now to help you with that?
Yeah, most often I'm working with a producer. I've got a great colleague who worked with me on the variety of sessions for the pharmaceutical client in clinical trials. And he knows the background really well for making Zoom work effectively. In other courses coming up for Rutgers, I'll be having some producer support in the background. But all of that tells me that the teachers who have had to adapt immediately to taking their courses in March and April of last year from face-to-face to online learning, probably without production help in the background or much production help, really are shown great virtue in learning, testing, trying, risking, and working their best for their students. So I give teachers who have adapted a great deal of credit for how they've been able to do the best they can for learners in this brand new environment we're all facing.
Yeah, surely it's been a an intense period of experimentation, learning, and adaptation, and it's been remarkable. I think that we've things are still together
Yeah,
and things are still moving.
yeah.
It's wonderful.
And there will be opportunities for continuing
Yeah.
virtual and online learning in the right scenarios. We're setting up through my Tri-States Human Relations Coalition, we're setting up a speaker series now where we're going to be providing Zoom interviews with speakers who are in the human relations field. And we're going to give that opportunity for many people to participate. Couldn't quite do that the same way if it were only face to face. So there are opportunities out there we hope to take advantage of that virtual learning and virtual platforms offer us.
If we have listeners who are interested in learning more about that, how might they get to know more?
More about,
The human relations.
well, oh, sure. The website for the group I'm involved in is www.tristatehrcoalition.org. That's all one word, tristatehrcoalition.org. We bring together members of human relations councils, commissions from the tri-state area, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and we've got active groups who've worked with us in the past, putting on conferences, educational events, now our speaker series, but people who are committed to saying in our society, rights, fairness, equity, anti-discrimination are things we should work towards. And our commitments are strong in trying to make communities better.
Great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
One of the things we're trying to do in this series of our podcast is to learn a little bit more about you and who you
Uh-huh.
are. And my colleague Zach Davis and I devised some questions that we ask our guests at the end of the show to get behind. You haven't seen these questions in advance, so you're responding in real time to them. So I'll just go through them, and you can feel free to think about it for a second or two if you want to. But what is one thing you would most like to do in your life that you have not yet done?
Well, uh, I'll give you my dream vacation for that, and that's explore New Zealand. I've not been there, and the pictures and the environment that I've seen, that is the nature and the that exists in New Zealand, is something that I'd like to see. My sister took a trip there and said it's fabulous. So I'd like to go there, and that would be a way for me to find something that I'm going to try to work on, and that is go to places that are awesome,
Mm.
that raise my sense of awe, whether it's the canyons of Utah and Arizona, the great, the Grand Canyon, places like that just raise my awe. I'd like to experience more awe in my life from natural beauty.
So, are you inspired by Lord of the Rings for about New Zealand? Is that
Yeah, I think that's probably where I saw that, and I said, "Wow, this is incredible environments. I sure would like to see what that is, and put myself in the midst of it."
so? My second question, in your opinion, what is one thing the world needs right now to make it a better place to live?
A better place to live. I think we all can interact more effectively with each other and listen more to each other in a spirit of openness. And I'm guilty of this myself, of not being as open to people who have varying and different perspectives. But I think that if we could talk well, we could engage in dialogue. And there are various groups facilitating dialogue in the religious communities in Philadelphia. Interfaith is one I think of. There are other groups trying to engage people back and forth and in discussion of differences. If we could be better and we could do better in hearing, understanding, and getting some grasp of how others see the world from their perspective, the sense of empathy that comes up in emotional intelligence, I think that'd be a good thing for all of us to engage in.
Well, amen to that. I agree with you completely. So, my third question, if you were back in school today, thinking about starting a career, what would you want to be when you grew up?
Well, in college, I got a degree. It was an independent major in modern literature. At the back of our yearbook, there's one picture of someone with a label called independent major, and that was me. I uh, I loved reading. I loved literature. I loved philosophy, and I pulled together a nice curriculum of courses that my advisor said, "Sure, we'll get approval, and you can be a modern literature major." If I were to do it over and to try to study a different area, now that I know myself differently over the many years since graduation, I'd probably study more social science and psychology, and dig deeper into that. Literature gives you the understanding of characters, which is related to psychology, surely, and perhaps social science. But I like now readings by people who are in social science and psychologists who have something to offer us. And I'd probably have some competency in those areas. So I'd probably study a little bit more in those more rigorous scientific psychology, social science areas.
Still not unrelated to what you're doing today, really.
Right. And it's an area I've moved into and found that, yes, I have interests. And when I do come up with a project, the more research I do, the more reading I do, the more I can find. For instance, on the change management work for the Columbia project I was writing, the more I could learn about it from what others have read really was energizing for me to really pull up insights. So I'd continue the studies that I've moved into, but in a more formal academic way at the start of my career.
Yeah, great. My fourth question: what hobby or activity outside of your work brings you joy?
Well, I'll tell you that I am an amateur woodworker. And I took courses at Bucks County Community College a number of years ago and worked in construction fields in the distant past, doing lots of different things. My wife says I'm pretty good at measurement, so she thinks that's one of my good competencies and capabilities. But I've made a chair, I've made various tables, I've made really lovely jewelry box for my daughter. The cabinet behind me that you can see in Zoom is something that I made in the course. So working with wood, there's a certain touch, sensory, smell, and so forth that's interesting to me. This summer, in the midst of COVID, I made a very interesting bench out of poplar that we have in our dining room. And so working with wood and creating some new designs and playing around with it is something I get my mind into and can't get away from. So I hopefully will keep working on projects that offer us something interesting in the house, but also give me some gratification from my competencies.
It sounds like creativity in the Sadlock household is pretty right. Your wife is an artist, isn't she?
My wife is an artist. She has had shows in Philadelphia and the area, and she's represented by a Philadelphia area gallery. And I sort of do my best in putting out pieces of furniture that help augment the works that she's put on the walls. I have things that are sitting there around the house that are my efforts.
I love too that you have brought some of her work into some of your training work. I think you did. I don't know whether you commissioned it or whether you commandeered some of it, but you brought some of her work into the Leadership Challenge workshops that you do.
She has done drawings for me that I bring into the workshops, and again, that's an activity based visuals that she's offered that lead to questions and discussion and valuable insights around certain topics that we use. I'm happy that you remember some of the visuals that appeared in some of those workshops because they do augment people's sense of sight for bringing in the topics of leadership or the content we're working with. So yeah, so she helps me out that way as well.
Well, she does a beautiful job and she's very incredibly talented. So my last question, what person, living or dead, has inspired you the most?
I'm gonna maybe not stay with a particular person, but I'm going to just refer to the concept of inspiration. We attend with some friends performances at Rider University. The Westminster School at Rider University in New Jersey is a performing arts school. And the students put on performances because they are aspiring to move into theater, dance, music, and so forth. And the performances that they put on inspires me because they are reaching for the best in themselves, and they are showing the best in themselves on stage, in singing, in dance. And when I see people, I'm particularly who are stretching themselves and doing the best, I really get inspired by that. The closing of any of the performances when we stand and give the students a standing ovation is a moment where tears can come to my eyes because I see them stretching and reaching. So in most situations, but particularly performing arts with this group of students, when I see them, I'm inspired by their efforts, by their work, by the things that are important and how they bring their best to the world.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you, Emil. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for stopping by the Zoom room and sharing your career and your work with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Steve, I really enjoyed doing this. This is fun. It's fun talking with you, and I'm pleased that we keep in contact and you've got so many exciting things going on. Thanks for bringing me involved and getting me involved in it.
My pleasure. Good to
Good
see you.
deal. Thanks.
My guest today was Emil Sadloch, president of Sadloch Development Associates. This has been a Learning Aloud podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania. My thanks to Dan Shields for producing today's show. My name is Steve Hart.